Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be kicking off in the next 2 or 3 minutes. For those of you just joining us, we'll be kicking off in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar, Beyond VPNs, the Future of Remote Access with Windows Virtual Desktop. My name is Finian Nally. I'm Head of Microsoft Cloud Solutions with ActionPoint. My role in the business is to manage the Microsoft practice and work closely with our team and our customers on Azure solutions and on Microsoft 365 solutions. I'm also joined on the webinar today by Alan Canan. Alan is the Azure Technical Lead with Micro Warehouse. Alan's been working in the IT industry for between 15 and 20 years now at this stage, and has worked very closely with Azure over the last 5 years specifically. Alan holds numerous certifications across infrastructure, security, and training with Azure, and I suppose works closely with our own in-house solution architects on new and upcoming Azure solutions on a regular basis. So before we get started today, I just want to launch a quick poll just to get some insight and opinion into, I suppose, the current challenges that we're all facing right now. You know, what challenges are you experiencing? What are you seeing in your business? So if you can just select any of the options that are relevant to you there, I think you can select more than one there. It'd be good to get an insight into what challenges you're facing right now. So we'll leave that open for about 20 more seconds. Great, thank you all for completing that. So to get into today, what are we actually going to cover? So today's agenda, we're going to discuss some of the challenges about working remotely. You know, this is a new world for a lot of us and for a lot of our colleagues and staff. You know, they've been thrown into the deep end with remote working. So we want to discuss about some of the challenges that we're seeing out there right now. We're then going to get into an overview of Windows Virtual Desktop and give you a sense of what it is and how it can actually address some of these challenges that we're facing. Alan will then come in and we'll get under the hood of things, really get into some of the secret sauce that makes Windows Virtual Desktop such a great technology and a game-changing technology. Alan will then do a quick demo of the end user experience to give you a sense of what it actually looks like. And then we'll go through a couple of key scenarios, I suppose, very relevant scenarios that we're seeing right now for a lot of our customers. And lastly, we'll do a Q&A. The question box is open throughout today's webinar. So, you know, if you have any questions at any stage, pop them in the question box and we'll go through them at the end and answer them as best we can. And likewise, we'll have our contact details up in the end. So if you want to reach out thereafter and follow up with more questions, certainly we'd be happy to do that. So to discuss the state of play today, you know, what are the challenges out there right now? And I think, you know, thinking about challenges, a big part of that is about expectation. if we think about this webinar today, many of us are used to going on to webinars on a regular basis. I'm working here from home here in Mullingar. Alan's in Dublin. Peter, who's behind the scenes there, is working out of home out of Limerick. And you, the audience, are coming in from multiple locations. But we all have an expectation that the video is going to work effectively, the software is going to work well, the sound is going to work well. Likewise, when we use consumer technology, be it WhatsApp or Gmail or Netflix or anything like that, which we're probably using a heck of a lot more of right now than we previously would have, we have an expectation that that is just going to work seamlessly. But yet, when we're challenged with facing a new world of working remotely and enabling our teams to work remotely, that same expectation isn't there. We've come from a background of maybe our in-house infrastructure, our IT platform has been just good enough. There's a lot of legacy operating systems, legacy software in there, and even legacy back office equipment. It worked fine in the office. There was no need to change it. We've also had, I suppose, maybe a questionable technology strategy. What are we doing from a device point of view? Are we continuing to roll out desktops? Do some of our users want the latest and greatest devices? And are we just rolling them out on an ad hoc basis and not really thinking of how best we can do that? And all of that has led to fragmentation, fragmentation among software, fragmentation among skills. But that has been completely exacerbated now, the fact that we've been forced to say, okay, well, we've gone from 0 or some level of remote access into potentially 100% remote access. And that fragmentation is dramatically increasing. So this creates challenges, and not only challenges for IT, challenges for the end user, and challenges for the business as a whole. And if we look at, think back to the middle of March, where really things started to change, where really we had to adapt very quickly. Typically, we saw one of two scenarios. The first was where a business had 0 remote working capacity. Maybe some people had access to email on their phone, but that really was the extent of our capacity or our ability to deliver remote working. And now we've gone to a scenario where we have to deliver 100% remote working. And our solution to that was, right, let's ship out some laptops, let's increase the number of VPN licenses, and there we go, with remote working delivered. But the reality was the end user experience was just okay, maybe not great in a lot of respects. The business experience was, again, yes, it's done, we have remote access, we're able to just about operate. But the IT experience was also questionable, created a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and still creates a lot of concern. And even when we look at businesses who had some level of remote working, maybe some of the team, were sales reps or engineers out on the road on a regular basis, or some staff who had the facility to work from home a number of days a week. The reality was we potentially had some back-end infrastructure that was capable of supporting effective remote access, but we never envisaged that would have to go from maybe 20, 30, 40% right up to 100% in the space of 24 hours. Again, we've gone with the solution here to send out laptops or send out some kind of devices to people, increase our in-house capacity, be it storage, virtual machines, etc., add in more VPN licensing. But fundamentally, we're delivering the same poor experience to users. But our primary goal is to be, right, let's get remote access up and running, and that's it, we're done, we're ready to go. And I think, again, looking back to the middle of March, our expectation was, right, this is going to be short term. But we're 4, almost 5 weeks later now, with still another couple of weeks ahead, and potentially more weeks ahead of that, where we're going to be forced into this environment where remote working is the norm, and this is the way our business has to operate. And while we've been heavily focused on, I suppose, keeping the lights on and trying to deliver some level of continuity, a lot of key things really haven't been considered because we simply haven't had the time or the ability to do it. If we look at the end user experience, is your actual end user getting a good experience? Is the connection process to connect into your network cumbersome? Are they coming in now on different equipment? Previously I might have been used to sitting at my desk with my dual monitors and my nice desk space. Now I'm sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop with an unfamiliar way of accessing things, with a desktop that is different, with applications and with files that when I click on them, they're very slow to open. And I find that sometimes they don't open at all. So my experience as an end user is very, very poor. I'm balancing that with actually family life as well, between minding the kids and prepping lunches and doing whatever else. So really my stress levels are increased, so my ability to perform effectively are dramatically reduced. Also, if we consider security, again, we've gone from a scenario where we have that platform in-house on-premise that's been fine, it's worked well. Maybe our approach to security has been, well, we have a firewall, we have antivirus, we have backup, and that's been pretty much it. But now we're faced in a scenario where our staff are connecting in from home networks. They're using single-factor authentication, simple username and passwords. There's no conditional access. We've no idea who else is using that home network or what they're doing on that home network. And also, we've no actual idea as to where our corporate data is going. Thinking about those challenges of users connecting in over VPN where they have that poor experience and they're going, well, do you know what, the VPN is working okay right now. I'm going to copy a load of files down onto my desktop so I can work with them throughout the day, and I'm going to avoid those connection issues. And maybe then I need to share those documents with colleagues. You know, I need to get opinion from them. I need to show my work to my boss or to whoever. Well, actually, again, because of the cumbersome process, I'm going to use Dropbox or Gmail or some other third-party applications. And that coupled with the fact that maybe I can't access some of the line of business applications I need, our CRM system or ERP system. Maybe I'm just going to go out to the internet and see where it actually is there any systems that can give me the same level of ability to project manage or do CRM or whatever. And I'm introducing real sprawl and real risk into the business. But again, from the business point of view, our goal has been to deliver remote working, and all of these challenges around security, while the risk has gone up dramatically, we simply haven't had time to consider them. Also, the fact that we've had to scale very, very rapidly. You know, maybe our expectation in the past was, yes, we have a firewall solution that can scale to or can have VPN connections for hundreds of users. But the reality of that, as I've said already, is that poor performance. We've also introduced single points of failure now. Maybe we have a single broadband line coming into our network that comes into, you know, single switching and single VPN and firewall environments. And there's a real question mark, right? If that equipment goes down, what are we going to do? How is our business actually going to function? As well as that, you know, how have we managed to scale? What has been the cost impact to the business? Not only the capital cost in terms of new equipment being brought in, but also the loss of performance, the expectation that, right, our end users are expected to work as effectively as they always have, but in reality that they can't, and we can no longer scale on demand any further. So there are lots of challenges out there. Yes, we have delivered remote working at a certain level, but there's really lots of other things going on right now that are creating risk and further fragmentation into our business. And it's, you know, sometimes quite easy to say, well, with the benefit of hindsight, why didn't we consider doing things better? Why didn't we take this into account? Number one, none of us ever expected that we would be in this scenario where we'd have this long-term remote working element in play. But number two, if we look at the solutions that are out there already, what were the fixes? How could we have addressed this? Maybe we could have went down the route of a dedicated VDI solution. Well, the reality of a VDI solution is typically they take a long time to get up and running. They're expensive. You know, you have to think about how you're scaling, and really that scaling is in one direction. Insofar as if I've got 200 staff today, am I going to have 250 next year, 300 the year after? I have to predict upwardly what way my business is going to go, not only in terms of number of people, but also in terms of applications, in terms of what they're doing, and also in terms of, you know, the volume of data that they'll be using. So it becomes very, very difficult to actually effectively spec that environment, to configure it, but also I have to have the overhead of continually managing that environment. So the reality when we look at traditional VDI solutions is that the complexity and everything that went with them meant we just, you know, they weren't practical. It was something that wasn't going to be introduced for a lot of businesses. Likewise, if we look at some of our legacy applications, you know, it would be great if we had access to this application today. I wish we had modernized it. Again, thinking about the challenge around that between, okay, well, we invested a couple of €100,000 in application X 10 years ago. We really don't want to have that level of investment again, and nor do we have the time and resources to actually sit down and plan out what that could look like. So hindsight is great, but often the solutions that were there in the past that could have addressed the scenario we're in now were just not practical and not reality for many businesses. So we now are in a scenario where we have a way of addressing that. We have something that is completely new in the market, is different in many ways to what we've seen before, and addresses, I suppose, a lot of the fundamental challenges that were there around traditional remote access solutions and VDI solutions. And Windows Virtual Desktop is that solution. So Windows Virtual Desktop is the best virtual desktop experience delivered on Azure. It's the only solution that delivers a true Windows 10 experience, and that's key to it. So if we think about our end users, you know, they're in our office or they're wherever they are, they're operating typically in a Windows 10 device. You know, they're used to that experience, they're used to the performance of it, they're used to how their applications work on that. Typically, if we're delivering a remote access solution, we're not delivering that same experience. We might be delivering a VPN solution, like I said, or we could be delivering an RDS solution, which in reality is just a Windows server dressed up to look like a Windows client device. With Windows Virtual Desktop, I'm delivering a true Windows 10 desktop dedicated to my end user. So it's giving me that real experience. As well as that, it's optimized for applications like Office 365. So again, those issues around user profiles, user connectivity, user searching, OneDrive, etc. All of those have been addressed under the hood, and Alan will go into a lot of detail on that in a little while. But the beauty of this solution is I'm also able to migrate some of my existing investment. So if I have some level of investment in RDS already, I'm able to bring up my application servers and use it in conjunction with Windows Virtual Desktop, which enables me to deploy and scale in minutes. And if we think about how that actually addresses some of the challenges that we faced, number one, I'm able to actually eliminate my VPNs. So that process I had of legacy VPN process of people having to use pre-share keys and double authentication, as well as the extra load on my on-premise environment, that's gone. It no longer exists. I'm giving user a familiar user experience, that Windows 10 experience. So my desktop that I use when I'm in the office is the exact same desktop that I use when I'm working from home, or when I'm working from wherever I am, on the road, in an airport, or whatever. It's consistent across the board. All my applications and all my data is accessible at any time and anywhere. So we're no longer limited by certain legacy applications, being available. Maybe we would have had the mindset previously to say, well, actually, these legacy applications, do you know what? In a disaster scenario, if they're not available for a certain number of days, it's not that big a deal. But we're now faced with a scenario where certain applications that might only have been used by a small number of individuals on an ad hoc basis are actually needed. We haven't been able to use these applications for a number of weeks now, and it turns out these are actually mission critical to delivering the month-end accounts, or for costing certain things, or delivering quotes to our clients. We now need to be able to deliver them effectively on Windows Virtual Desktop. I can. As well as that, I have the ability to choose from delivering just a single application or multiple applications, or giving that full-blown desktop experience to the end user. And lastly, security is built in, not added on. I think that's a key point to this, and it's something I'll discuss in a little bit more detail in a while. With a lot of solutions out there, security is an afterthought. It's something we think about, later on down the line. But security with Windows Virtual Desktop is built in from the ground up. And delivering that best end user experience really is built on a number of aspects. One is that, any device, be it a Windows device, Mac device, iOS, any level of browser that supports HTML5. I've even seen Windows Virtual Desktop used on a Tesla car, on the touch screen in the car itself. So it's a very, very flexible platform. It means it can be accessed from anywhere. It gives that end user that like Windows experience. It is Windows 10, so therefore it's like everything they're used to. It's using enhanced protocols like dynamic bandwidth and Windows Hello. It's containerizing applications and profiles, so I'm no longer experiencing that slow login and those kind of connection storm issues that we would have had in the past. And it's enhancing experiences like Teams, video conferencing, and audio as well. So it's doing a lot under the hood and out of the box. So if we think about the scenario we're in right now, yes, our workforce, be it all of it or part of it, has been forced to work remotely. That's the scenario right now, and that's actually the thing that Windows Virtual Desktop can address. But at some point in time, hopefully in the next few weeks, the restrictions are going to be lifted. We hope to get back to some level of normality, and we have to ask the question: do we want to go back to business as normal in terms of our IT infrastructure, in terms of delivering remote solutions to our workers, or do we want to actually start to think how Windows Virtual Desktop can actually help our business? So to give you some scenarios as to where Windows Virtual Desktop sits, or where it can fit in, if we think about regulated industries and industries that are secure, typically financial services, healthcare, government, but also many of our businesses that we have very sensitive IP that we don't want that information, be it simple, cost files, IP, or certain products that we've created. We don't want that getting out into the wild. So the beauty of Windows Virtual Desktop is that all of that information is secure. It's secured in the Windows Virtual Desktop environment, and it can't escape out into the end user's desktop or out into their Gmail account. Also, if we think about our workforce, I mentioned earlier on, with more traditional solutions only having the ability to scale one way, essentially. The reality is, for many businesses, we don't know what our business is going to look like in a few months' time. Are we going to be, acquiring a new business, maybe acquiring a competitor? Are we actually going to be downsizing? Maybe we need to reduce our workforce by 20%. but we have a knowledge that actually, you know what, we're going to scale that back up by an additional 50% due to seasonalities, maybe around Christmas time or early next year or something like that. How exactly do we cope with that? The beauty of Windows Virtual Desktop is it can expands and contracts elastically as you need. If you need to add 50 more users, great, it can expand to that. If you need to reduce by 100 users, yes, it can actually reduce on demand as well. But it can also factor in how we actually work. Knowing that workers don't work 24/7 and that our staff work, mostly 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, we can dramatically or dynamically scale as we need it. And also factoring in, specific employees and specific workload types. We have our typical admin worker who may just work on Excel and Word files, very, very light users. We may also have other users that are out in the road on a regular basis, but still need access to certain line of business applications and certain data. And on the other extreme, we have workers who are maybe working with high graphic intensive applications, maybe large files, CAD drawings, applications like that. So Windows Virtual Desktop can actually cope very, very well with all of those environments to deliver, a very simple normal desktop for an average end user, right up to an enterprise desktop that has graphics built in at the back end. So very, very flexible. I mentioned security is at its core earlier on, so just to touch on a certain number of aspects around that. Windows Virtual Desktop, it sits on top of the Microsoft Azure platform, which is a global platform, 58 regions worldwide right now, across 140 countries. And the beauty of that, it gives me as the end user or as the IT admin the ability to decide where I want this to be. So do I want this in the Dublin data center and nowhere else, or do I want this across multiple locations? Maybe I have a global workforce or plan to go into global markets. So I have that ability to scale globally. Secondly, I suppose Azure has one of the deepest and most comprehensive levels of compliance of any cloud provider, close to 100 different certifications from ISO, PCI, GDPR, etc. Literally, many certifications there that are renewed on a consistent basis. But getting down into the level of Windows Virtual Desktop and that security built in from the ground up, it's leveraging tools like Active Directory services, it's reducing the attack surface, and it's isolating user environments. So what does that actually look like? So if we think about on-premise virtualization, and I mentioned the challenge about security, knowing that security isn't our primary business goal, it's delivering our core product or servicing our customers. And often with on-premise environments, it really was, too difficult and too cumbersome to deploy it. With Windows Virtual Desktop, things like multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and various other controls are native part of the solution. Likewise, open ports was often an issue for traditional RDS solutions. If I'm delivering an RDS solution for my team, I have to open up an RDS gateway and certain ports on it. Naturally, they're going to be a target for hackers and for someone to try and breach my network. With WVD, inbound ports are closed. There are no inbound ports open, so therefore the attack surface is dramatically reduced. And in addition, my user profiles. My user profiles, be it I'm using Windows 10 single session or I'm using Windows 10 multi-session, those user data is siloed out. It's containerized. So it means it's much easier for us to guarantee the security of not only the end user data, but also our corporate data in very, very detailed ways. So I think I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that, and I'd like to bring in Alan, who's going to discuss things around, some of the key kind of secret sauce elements to it, and go into a quick demo thereafter. So I'm just going to hand over control to Alan.
Thank you, Finian. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Finian said, I'm just going to dig a little bit deeper into what Finian has already discussed and talk a little bit more about Windows Virtual Desktop and how it works under the hood. So let's have a look here. Okay, so just looking at a high level architecture of Windows Virtual Desktop and how it works. I suppose the main difference between Windows Virtual Desktop and its predecessor, which would have been Remote Desktop Services, is this is part managed by Microsoft. So if you're familiar with Remote Desktop Services, there's a number of different server elements, server roles you need to install and manage yourself. That handles all the connectivity, the connection brokering, the gateway, all the routing, the licensing. If you're using a web browser to access it, all those roles need to be installed in Windows Server and managed. And if you've got a large environment, you don't really want to put all of these roles on a single server, because you've got a single point of failure there. If that server goes down, the whole system's gone down. So normally you'd need to spread these out over a number of servers, and that means more servers for you to maintain and to patch, and more expense. With Windows Virtual Desktop, Microsoft actually manage most of that for you. So they'll manage all the connection brokering and the gateway for you. That's part of the service. You still have to provision the session hosts, which is the machines that the users would connect into. You install all your applications, and you obviously manage that and maintain that. But how it is accessed is there is an agent installed on that session host, and as Finian was explaining, you do not need to open any ports or forward any ports onto those session hosts. That agent is listening constantly to that Microsoft managed, that Microsoft hosted gateway and connection broker service. So that's listening for connections coming into the environment. That's all set up and managed for you. You don't need to provision anything. You don't need to set anything up. It's all taken care of for you. So that is listening for those inbound connections. So when you go to log into Windows Virtual Desktop and authenticate using your Azure Active Directory credentials, you're actually making a connection into that managed gateway service by Microsoft. Once you authenticate successfully to that, that will then reverse connect into your session host environment. So as I said, because that's managed by Microsoft, that is a reverse connection into the environment, and you can then log in successfully there without having to open any ports or anything. Just moving on then to the next slide. Fini would have covered this as well. This is a slide I would use in a lot of talks I give, and it's a slide I need to update almost on a monthly basis at this stage, because Microsoft are constantly adding new data centers, new regions as they call it, to their global footprint. So as Fini mentioned, there's about 58 currently available. Some have been announced recently, and they're spread out throughout the globe. In terms of Windows Virtual Desktop, that managed gateway service that I mentioned, at the moment, these stars on this map is where those host clusters are located. So the region we're in is called North Europe. So we actually have one of the largest Microsoft regions in the world based here in Ireland, and that does have a hosted gateway service for Windows Virtual Desktop right here. So what it means is, no matter where you're connecting into the service in the world, you will automatically get routed to your nearest gateway service, and then from there routed onto your session hosts. And you can choose any of those 50 plus regions to deploy your session hosts into. But the routing is all taken care of on a geographic basis based on where you're located. In terms of benefits of a remote desktop service, I've put together a few bullet points about why I think this is a much better service to go with versus RDS. First and foremost, probably the end user experience. So we now have a multi-session version of Windows 10. This is exclusive to Windows Virtual Desktop on Microsoft Azure. You cannot get a multi-session version of Windows 10 anywhere else. You cannot do this on premises. You cannot do this in a private data center. It's exclusive to Windows Virtual Desktop on Azure. What that means is you can provision a virtual machine running Windows 10 and have multiple users connected to that simultaneously. That was previously not possible. So it's a great way to bring your costs down, having multiple users sharing those same resources on a single virtual machine. We use FSLogix profile containers to optimize the user performance. I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly, but this really containerizes the user profile and simulates as if the user is logged on locally to that machine. So rather than keeping all of your user profiles on the actual session host, they're actually mounted upon logon. I'll talk about that in a little more detail shortly. The deployment compared to remote desktop services is far more simplified. So all those roles I said are managed by Microsoft. You obviously don't need to deploy those. They're provisioned for you as a PaaS service. So you don't need to deploy virtual machines and install those roles and then maintain those virtual machines going forward. So that makes that side of it a lot more simple. And then of course, the troubleshooting aspect, there's a lot less for you to support because Microsoft are managing that for you. They obviously support that for you. So there's a lot less overheads for IT to look after that environment. As mentioned, you don't need to open any ports, so your environment is secure by default. No ports need to be open to get into it. You don't need to purchase your own SSL certificates and renew those on an annual basis. That was another additional expense. Because Microsoft are hosting the gateway, that's where the security is set up, and that's where the SSL certs would be, and that's what Microsoft manage for you. Obviously, the rest of your environment is up to you to manage. The other good thing I like about this is you can, because it's leveraging your Azure AD credentials, so that's the same credentials you'd use for your Office 365 subscriptions, and you can leverage the likes of multi-factor authentication and other cloud security products with that as well. That's quite a difficult thing to achieve with remote desktop services, but it's there out of the box with Windows Virtual Desktop. So talking about FSLogix now, so this is what I said we'd be using for our profile containers. This is a company Microsoft acquired a little while back, and this offers a few additional benefits to Windows Virtual Desktop. I'll talk a bit more about profile containers shortly. In addition to that, it will allow you to do something called application masking or app masking. What that allows you to do is, if you've got a lot of different departments in your organization, they all would always have different applications. So finance would have finance applications, legal would have legal applications, HR has HR applications. You don't necessarily want all users being able to see or potentially access applications from other departments. So this just allows you a way to hide those applications from other users, just simply by not having them appear when the user signs in. Also, if you're still using Java, so a lot of banking websites would rely on Java technologies, and some older apps do. This was a notorious problem with regular updates breaking things, so very specific versions of Java runtime would need to be installed for these applications or these websites to work. So you can use Java redirection to lock in a particular version of a Java runtime for a particular application or a particular website. So rather than having to install the latest version every time and that potentially breaking various applications or websites for other users, you can actually have multiple versions installed and applied to different applications. So it's just a nice way to get around that. But really what we want to focus on is the profile containers and how that works. So how this works is your user profile is, obviously it's a collection of files, so your desktop and your documents, I suppose what most people would know. These are actually stored in a virtual hard disk file, and that would be stored in a separate location, so it wouldn't be stored on the session host machines. Because you could have a bank of several session hosts, you might have 5 or 10 of them if your organization is big enough. Every time you log in, you could get logged into a different session host machine. Okay, so your session would not be persistent and tied into a specific machine. So what happens is your profile gets mounted from a location somewhere else on the network, and there's a few options to this. You could just store them on a disk on a file server virtual machine, or you can utilize serverless options such as Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files. So that's a file share that does not require a server, a virtual machine to run. And here's a graphic of that to demonstrate. So that's a way you can create a file share utilizing a serverless environment with maximum throughput and IOPS. So that's the performance, how many operations per second, and the transfer speed of the actual profile. So when your user logs in, that profile gets mounted across the network. It presents itself to the session host as if the user is logged on locally, as if those files, those profile files, are actually local to that particular machine. The user works away as normal, and then when they log out, that profile gets dismounted, and the next time they log in, it just gets mounted again. By doing this, it means the performance of the applications on the machine is optimized, because all those applications see that profile as being local. So the likes of your Outlook, your cache for Outlook, your search indexing, your OneDrive for business, all of these applications will perform much better with this. Whereas previously, if you were using the likes of roaming profiles, you'd have to copy all of your profile data across the network to that particular machine when you log in. And then when you log out, it has to be saved back across the network, back to that server. So with this, it's just mounted and dismounted across the network, and it provides a huge amount of optimization, particularly for Office 365. And again, because you can now run Windows 10 multi-session as part of this, you get the optimization of that. So you're not running on a Windows Server environment. It's optimized for Windows 10 in particular. Moving on from that, that's great for the profiles and your files and so on. But what about the applications? So I mentioned, yes, you can install all these applications on a single image and have each of your department's applications installed, and you can hide them from one another. But that can get very cluttered, and then over time that gets very difficult to maintain when you've got lots of different applications and lots of different versions of applications to update and manage. It makes it very difficult. So using that same technology that FSLogix uses, where you mount the user profile upon login, MSIX App Attach is a technology that's in preview at the moment that allows you to actually attach applications upon login. So when the user logs in, say they work in the finance department, they could have their Sage applications get mapped and attached directly to that session host just for the duration of that session. They can work away, use those applications again. It appears as if the application is installed locally on that machine. And then when they log off, the application gets detached and removed again. And if a different user, say someone from HR, logs into that same machine, their applications get attached to that machine just for their session and then dismounted afterwards. This just makes it much easier for the IT department to maintain image control and keep the latest versions of these applications maintained, and then just get mapped once the user logs in. So this technology is in preview at the moment, so that means it's available for people to test, but it's not quite production ready yet. But I've had a look at it, and it's very promising indeed. I think this will definitely be the future of image management when it comes to Windows Virtual Desktop. And that's one of the good things about Windows Virtual Desktop. It's not an out-of-the-box technology. That it is what you get. If you want to upgrade, you pay more. It's a constantly evolving technology, as is cloud computing in general. So there's new features and new services being released all the time. So as these become available, you just get access to them. Rarely is there an additional cost. When a new feature comes along, you can use it straight away if you want to. So that's one of the things I like most about Windows Virtual Desktop. So I'm going to give you a quick demo now. Just take control here and show you my environment. So if you can see my screen here now, I'm on a Windows device, so I'm using the Windows Desktop client for Windows Virtual Desktop. So this is a tenant I have. I've published a number of applications here, and I've got a couple of desktops. So you may have a user who needs access to a few different systems, and they may not be hosted on the same desktop. So for example, you could have a dedicated pool of devices for the finance department, and you could have a dedicated pool of virtual machines for another department. But just to show you the experience upon logging in, I'm going to just double click on this and sign in. You will get prompted for your sign-in credentials. And once that authenticates, so again, this is routed through the managed proxy service by Microsoft, the managed service. FSLogix is enabled there, as you can see, and then that gets passed on to my hosted session host. And then I should see my desktop momentarily. So again, all of this is happening for you. All the connection, brokering, the routing, the mounting of the profile is happening. There's my desktop. Now I don't have very much on this, but there's a file I had saved on my desktop. That's on my FSLogix profile container, which is not saved on this machine. It's saved on a different machine, and it's just mounted upon login. I'm logged in. I have my desktop. I don't have too many applications, but I obviously have my Microsoft Office suite of applications installed on here, and I can log in and use these applications. And in terms of the actual machines you want to pick and the specs of them, that's entirely up to you. So if you need more powerful machines for certain users, you can pick those. If you need less powerful machines for other users, you can choose those. All that choice is up to you. I can now log in and use all these applications. And when I'm finished, I just simply log out as I normally would. And then I'll be back to my own desktop. That's a desktop experience. I'll just wait for those to sign out. Apart from the desktop, you can publish applications as well. So you may not want to give that full desktop experience to users. You may just want to publish some line of business applications just so users can access those applications remotely rather than seeing a full desktop. It works the same way. You just double click on the application. That will launch, and again, it will appear as if the user is actually accessing that from the local machine. So this is Excel. This Excel is not installed on my machine. It's actually running from my remote environment. As you can see, I'm logged in as my Bill Gates test user there. I can close out of that. Another thing I like to show people is, rather than going into this client, if you wish, these actually get published to your start menu as well. So if I scroll down here, I've got my host pool environment here. There's those same applications and desktops published there. So these can be pinned to your start menu if you like, and I can just simply click on that and I can launch Microsoft Access. Again, that's not installed on my machine, that's running via Windows Virtual Desktop, but I'm just running that application on my local machine as if it was installed here locally. Easy as that. And then just quickly to show you another experience, you can actually sign in through a web browser. So usually you'd probably use this if you're not on a Windows machine. I would prefer to go with the client experience if you've got a Windows machine, but just say you want to sign in from another device. This you can access, there are clients available for iOS, Android, obviously Windows, but if you're signing in from another device, as long as it's got a web browser, you can sign in. It's just got a HTML5 client. I'll just show you the experience from here. Again, this is just your Azure Active Directory credentials, so you can brand this with your organization setup. The correct password would help. Oh, timed out. And as you can see, I have got this protected with multi-factor authentication. So I'm just going to prove that on my mobile phone here. Complete the sign-in. And then again, you should see the same icons I had before. So I've got those same applications and those desktops. Just sign into my desktops. You can redirect your printers and your local drives. So if you've got printers set up, they should be accessible. If you need to access your local hard drive via Windows Virtual Desktop, again, that could be set up. Complete the sign-in process here. Generally, you'd only be signing in once per day anyway, so once you're signed in, you're good to go. And it works the same way as the desktop client does as well. Once you're authenticated, you'll get the same login experience, and it just means you can then access that desktop via a browser. So again, I've got a desktop within a desktop here, so all of this is accessible. So I'm just using a web browser here, Microsoft Edge, and I can work away, use my applications all through the browser, which is pretty cool. And the experience, I think, is pretty decent considering it's a web browser. It's quite good. So that's a demo very quickly, but it's as easy as that. Again, it's not just for Microsoft Office applications. Any Windows-based applications, you can install them on this and you can publish those and access them either via the desktop or via the published apps. It's really as easy as that. And with that, I will hand it back to Finian.
That's great, Alan. Thanks very much. That was a great demo in the limited amount of time that we have. I think, what really impresses me about the Windows Virtual Desktop solution is that ability to have those applications in your start menu. So I'm just on my normal laptop, my normal desktop, and I have applications that are in the Windows Virtual Desktop solution. But from an end user point of view, they appear as if they're locally installed. So again, thinking of those scenarios where I want to secure my applications or I want to secure my data while giving a great end user experience, it does that very, very well. So thanks again, Alan, for that overview. Just to skip on and finish off the last couple of slides here before we go into questions, the key scenarios that we see, that there are an awful lot of scenarios and an awful lot of ways you can deliver this, but I think just to highlight the three key scenarios that we see. First and foremost is your legacy applications. If you have legacy applications that you're struggling to deliver to your staff remotely or wherever they are, or even they may be sitting on legacy servers or legacy infrastructure that really you don't want to have that capital cost of replacing all of that, reinstalling the application and doing everything that goes around that. Think of Windows Virtual Desktop as the option for that, as to deliver either a single app or multiple applications to your team, regardless of whatever device they're on. The second scenario is that I want that full desktop experience. We want to move fully to the cloud here. We want our end users to have the exact same experience, the exact same desktop, regardless of where they're connecting in from, while at the same time having that full security blanket around our infrastructure, our applications, and our data, meaning that we set the rules, we set the policies around that. But again, our end users are confident that regardless of where they're coming in from, they're getting that great experience. And really the last scenario that we're having an awful lot of conversations with customers right now is around business continuity. And we've put together a solution called Action Point Cloud Hot Site. You know, if we think about your existing investment, and for many businesses, they have an existing investment in on-premise infrastructure, and that isn't going to change maybe in the short term or in the medium term. So a full migration to the cloud is not reality. However, in scenarios like the one we're faced right now, where we want to deliver true business continuity, or even if we think down the line where our on-premise infrastructure may fail, how do we actually deliver effective business continuity? The process in the past maybe has been to focus solely on backup and solely on disaster recovery, whereby maybe I'm replicating my servers offsite or I'm replicating to the cloud. The reality is of that replication, it's very good and very efficient, but what happens when something goes wrong? How are my end users actually going to access their applications? How are they going to access their data? And often that's considered an afterthought, right? Our primary site has gone down, let's fail over to our DR site, but actually, how does our team actually connect in? How do they actually work on a day-to-day basis? So with Cloud Hot Site, we leverage the power of Windows Virtual Desktop, meaning that when we fail over to Azure, we boot up your on-premise environment up in Azure, your servers, your applications, etc. And then we attach a standby Windows Virtual Desktop environment to that, which allows us to dramatically scale up. So in this disaster scenario, maybe you only need a handful of users getting access to your system, or maybe you need every single user getting access to your system. And Cloud Hot Site allows us to do that very, very flexibly. So again, not only thinking in terms of, you know, we need to deliver a line of business application, but maybe we need to deliver a business continuity solution to our business very, very rapidly. And Windows Virtual Desktop supports that. Last couple of slides now. So, you know, is Windows Virtual Desktop right for you? And this is something we'll send out in the follow-up email. I'm not going to read through it all right now. But again, lots of scenarios, you know, where I need that profile, where I need that consistent experience, where I need that legacy application, even down to the level of, well, I actually have a number of Windows 7 devices still running. You know, we can actually deliver Windows 7 desktops that still have all the security updates for the next 3 years using Windows Virtual Desktop. So scenarios like that, so you're not forced to go down the Windows 10 route. Windows 7 is still available, and it's the only solution that actually can deliver this. And there are many, many more scenarios. So where to start? You know, a lot of people start with the first POC or first application. So talk to us today about a Windows Virtual Desktop POC. We're running a number of them with customers right now who have certain line of business applications that they want virtualized or delivered through Windows Virtual Desktop. Likewise, if you're concerned about your business continuity, how are people actually going to operate? How are people actually going to work if we have a disaster? Talk to us about Cloud Hot Site. And lastly, if you're thinking about, you know, we have legacy infrastructure or it's time for a full move to the cloud, talk to us about moving or implementing a full Windows Virtual Desktop solution with Office 365 or Microsoft 365. And with that, I'm going to hand over to questions, but just one last thing to note is that we do have a series of webinars coming. We've been running these, I think, for the last 4 or 5 weeks now. If you go to actionpoint.ie/academy, you see our upcoming webinars. And we'll also be launching virtual training there in the next couple of weeks too as well, so keep an eye on that. And with that, I'll just have a look over into what questions have come in. So let me before I bring them up, Alan, just a quick one for yourself, I suppose, in your own experience using the likes of FSLogix, you know, how has that been different with the likes of Outlook and applications like that? Have you seen much performance difference?
Yeah, most of my feedback would be from customers who've used this, and what I've been asking them the same question, how they found the difference. I think Outlook is the big winner. It's mainly indexing with that. So obviously Outlook maintains an index. I know that the predecessor to FSLogix was user profile disks, and with that, your indexes were basically flushed every time you logged out. So that wasn't maintained. They are maintained with FSLogix. So in terms of doing things like searches within Outlook, or even just on Windows using the desktop search, that performance-wise is much better than it was before. But again, with that multi-user environment, things often got complicated there with multiple users having multiple indexes. That wasn't really possible without FSLogix. But yeah, it's made a huge improvement there, and there's a lot more optimization you can do. There's a huge amount of settings you can tweak with it to further improve things. So it's really it's made a massive difference.
Great. So a question in there, what impact does local bandwidth have on performance? Alan, your experience of that, people coming in on the likes of mobile connections, 4G connections, that kind of thing?
Yeah, there are some guidelines around this. So it does depend on a few things, such as even the likes of screen resolution, what type of applications you're running, frame rates. But there are some loose guidelines depending on what you're running, what type of applications you're running. A good ballpark figure for the smoothest experience is a 5 meg connection. And that's really just because it's just presenting the screen across your connection. That's a kind of a good guide. If you have a 5 meg or better connection, you shouldn't have any issues at all. But it really depends what type of user you are and what type of applications you're running. Like if you were trying to run videos and things over, you obviously need a decent connection. But I haven't really had any issues on that side of things from customers to date. Generally, I mean, yeah, most people, I suppose, nowadays have decent home connections, so it's generally pretty okay.
Yeah, I think we'd see the same thing. So once a generally okay home connection is there, the user performance is going to be fine. The technology that's under the hood, the bandwidth optimization technology that's there, is really dynamic at delivering the best user experience based on what the end user connectivity is. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question there: where does the organization data sit? For example, CAD currently stored on an on-site server. Where would this need to sit for WVD? Well, really, that's an it depends question. So let's say a scenario where you have, you're still going to have the on-premise office. People are still going to be working locally, working off the file server, etc. But then you have a cohort of users who are working remotely. In that scenario, I suppose we can leverage some of the file tools or the file platform as a service services that Alan mentioned earlier on. So in other words, you can still have your files locally, but they are synced up to Azure and then accessible in the Windows Virtual Desktop environment. So certainly there's ways to do that now, leveraging some of the technology that really didn't exist 12, 18 months ago. And you're accommodating both your on-premise users, but also your remote users. Again, thinking about, the old way of doing things, VPNs and those kind of things, we want to try and avoid that. So certainly there's possibility around that for the likes of those CAD data files. Another question in there: can a user have multiple desktop images or views? Yeah, I think Alan mentioned that just in his demo there. He touched on it briefly. So, I might be a particular user that I need a high-end desktop with graphics, once a week or once a month or something like that. Well, there's no point in the organization providing me with a dedicated high-end graphics intensive Windows Virtual Desktop session on a consistent basis. So I may well have access to that and I can choose to use it whenever I want, but I may also have my standard desktop, which does me 90% of the time. So that ability to give an end user multiple desktops is there, and Alan touched on it briefly in his demo. Can it run 3D programs like Navisworks? Not a program I'm familiar with, Adrian, but it can run high intensity graphics applications. Again, some of the servers in there have dedicated NVIDIA graphics associated with them, so they certainly can be attached to the WVD environment, and as a result, I suppose you can use those 3D applications in rendering. Naturally, cost is a factor within that, so the higher spec you go and the more resources you give an end user, the cost applies to that. So in a scenario where we need to give high-end graphics or high-end compute resources, we look to see, okay, what's the best way of delivering that? Is it just in short term, or is it on a permanent basis, and permanent being 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? So yeah, lots of different ways of delivering that, but we can talk in more detail offline if you'd like on that one. I think that's most of the questions. Just if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in at the end. I'm just going to pop our poll up on the screen. It was interesting, some of the comments earlier on, the challenges that are out there right now, and really poor performance, was one of the largest in there in terms of those legacy applications, VPN. And it is a message that we're seeing consistently from, or hearing consistently from end users, that the VPN solution is a just okay solution, but it's not sustainable for long term. And coupled with that, many of the security issues that I highlighted earlier on. It's interesting to see, the IT support demands have increased, and we ourselves would see that not only in terms of simple technical support requests, but also the fact that users really haven't had any lead time or training into this. So as much as there is a technical demand on IT support right now, there's certainly a training demand out there as well. But yeah, some interesting insights. So just looking at the list there, I think that's all the questions for now. So I'd like to thank Alan for coming on the webinar with me today. Thanks for your insights, Alan, and expertise in bringing that. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you're all keeping well. I hope the remote working isn't stressing people out too much, and you're getting by with those systems you have as best as you can. And yeah, with that, I think I will finish things up and wrap things up for today. So enjoy the rest of your day. It's only Thursday, but the weekend isn't too far away, so enjoy the weekend too. Thanks very much.